We call them the pillars of our community. We hand them our children and our trust, believing that within the four walls of a classroom, the only thing being nurtured is a future. But in the United States, a darker reality has been festering behind the chalkboard. A reality where the person at the front of the room isn't a mentor, but a hunter. She was my favorite teacher. Those are the words that usually begin the descent into a nightmare. In this investigation, we aren't looking at a back-alley crime. We are looking at a systematic betrayal of innocence that occurred in the light of day, under the humming fluorescent lights of an American school. This is the disturbing true story of the classroom predator, a case of female-on-male sexual abuse that challenges everything we thought we knew about power, protection, and the face of evil. What happened in that classroom wasn't education. It was the calculated destruction of a young man's life. Grooming is not an explosion. It is a slow, methodical erosion of boundaries. For the victim, let's call him Jason, it started with a smile. She was the teacher everyone loved. She was young, charismatic, and seemed to understand him better than his own parents did. In the high-pressure environment of a U.S. high school, Jason was just another face in the crowd, until she made him feel like the only one who mattered. It began with special privileges, an extra bit of help on an assignment, a hall pass he didn't ask for. Then, the digital barrier broke. A text message about homework that slowly morphed into a late-night conversation about his personal life. To Jason, this feels like a friendship. He felt chosen. He feels mature. But in reality, he was isolated. She was mapping his vulnerabilities. She learned about his insecurities, his need for validation, and the gaps in his home life. She positioned herself not as an authority figure, but as a confidant. This is the hallmark of female predators in the educational system. They don't use violence to enter a child's life. They use care. The environment of the school served as her perfect camouflage. When they stayed late in her classroom, people saw a dedicated teacher helping a struggling student. When they sat close together at her desk, people saw mentorship. But every kind gesture was a brick in a wall she was building around him, cutting him off from the world, until the only person he felt he could trust was the very person who was preparing to violate him. The trap was set, and the classroom door was about to be locked. The transition from favorite teacher to predator happened behind a locked door. The first time it occurred, the shock was more paralyzing than any physical weapon. For a young man, the confusion is total. Society tells him he should want this. Society tells him he's lucky. But Jason didn't feel lucky. He felt cold. He felt small. This is the brutal reality of male sexual abuse in our schools. The predator leverages her position of power to ensure silence. "This is our secret," she whispered. "If you tell anyone, they'll think you started it. You'll be the one in trouble." She turned his own emerging biology into a weapon against him, making him feel complicit in his own violation. The acts of sexual abuse were not about affection. They were about the thrill of the violation and the absolute control over a human being who was legally and psychologically incapable of consenting. The classroom, once a place of learning, was now a crime scene. Every afternoon session, every private tutor meeting, was a repeated act of trauma. He lived in a state of constant cognitive dissonance. He was a student by day and a victim by night, forced to sit in her class and listen to her lecture about ethics and history, while her hand brushed against his under the table. The weight of the secret began to crush him. He was a survivor of a crime that he didn't even have the words to describe yet. He was trapped in the teacher-student dynamic, where the person who was supposed to grade his papers was instead grading his level of submission. The violation was complete, and the predator believed she was untouchable. Secrets have a way of poisoning the atmosphere long before they are spoken aloud. For Jason's parents, it wasn't a single aha moment. It was a slow accumulation of shadows. A son who was once vibrant, now becoming a ghost in his own home. Grades that remained high, but an anxiety that spiked every time his phone lit up. The breakthrough came from a single, forgotten device. An iPad left on the kitchen counter, synced to the messages that were never meant for eyes other than his. I miss you. I can't wait for after-school practice. Don't tell your mom. The words on the screen didn't match the woman they had met at parent-teacher night. The shock was a physical blow. When the confrontation happened, Jason didn't deny it. He couldn't. The wall of silence he had lived behind for months finally crumbled, replaced by a flood of tears and a confession that tasted like ash. But the discovery was only the beginning of a new kind of hell. As the police were called and the school board was notified, the community began to fracture. In a small U.S. town, a female teacher being accused of sexual abuse is a grenade thrown into the social fabric. There were those who stood by Jason, but there were others, disturbingly many, who whispered that he was lucky, or that he must have been the one to seduce her. The predator's camouflage was so effective that even with the evidence in plain sight, people struggled to see the monster behind the master's degree. When the case reached the American legal system, a glaring spotlight was shone on a systemic double standard. The prosecution presented the text messages, the forensic evidence from her car, and the testimony of a boy whose childhood had been stolen. But the defense had a strategy that is tragically common in cases involving female predators. The lovesick woman trope. They painted her not as a criminal, but as a woman who had lost her way. They focused on her clean record, her contributions to the school, and her fragile mental state. In courtrooms across the U.S., female offenders often receive significantly lighter sentences than their male counterparts for the exact same crimes. The terminology shifts. It's called an affair, or an inappropriate relationship, instead of what it actually is, sexual abuse and a violation of the law. The sentencing day was a moment of bitter realization for Jason and his family. While a male teacher would likely be facing decades in a high-security prison, her sentence was a fraction of that. A few years, some probation, and a permanent ban from teaching. To the victim, it felt like the system was telling him his trauma was worth less because of his gender. It was a verdict that protected the perpetrator's potential, while ignoring the fact that the victim's potential had already been shattered. The headlines eventually faded. The teacher moved away to start a new life under a different name. But for Jason, there is no starting over. The aftermath of male sexual abuse is a silent, ongoing war. For years, he struggled with intimacy, unable to trust anyone who showed him kindness. He faced the ghost of his predator in every classroom he entered and every relationship he tried to build. The psychological grooming had convinced him that his value was tied to his violation, and unlearning that lie is a journey that takes a lifetime. In the United States, we are finally beginning to have the difficult conversation about the classroom predator. We are learning that the hero in the classroom can also be the monster in the dark. We are realizing that the gender of the perpetrator doesn't change the gravity of the crime. To every survivor watching this, your gender does not invalidate your pain. You are not lucky. You are a victim of a crime that should never have happened. By bringing these stories into the light, we strip the predators of their greatest weapon, the silence of their victims. If this investigation moved you, please subscribe to help us keep shedding light on the truths society tries to hide. Share this video to raise awareness for male survivors of sexual abuse. Leave a comment below. Your voice could be the strength someone else needs to finally speak up. Let's break the cycle together.